Many of our videos are in essence book reviews, since we prefer to quote the classical and modern authors to encourage you to study and reflect on these classics. We also record videos on collections of book reviews that can be referenced by other videos, so we're not overly repetitious. Nearly all of the books we review here will be covered in current and future videos and our YouTube playlist on Trent and Vatican II. And our main source for the sequential history of Vatican II and Trent are the writings of John O'Malley. In my humble opinion, you cannot truly understand the modern Catholic Church without reading John O'Malley's histories of Trent and Vatican II. O'Malley argues that Vatican II restated the theology of Trent, countering the notion that Trent was a reactionary rather than a reforming council. In the polemic view by many that Vatican II was a repudiation of the decrees of Trent, and this polemic view of Trent was influenced by the fact that the Vatican had closed the archives of the Trent Council until early in the 20th century. And with this corrected view of history, we can see how the Vatican II was really a reaffirmation of Trent rather than a rejection. John O'Malley has written books and recorded lectures with Learn 25 on Trent, Vatican II, and many other topics. We recommend that you read both his books and listen to the related lectures, and the lectures provide important highlights, while the books have more interesting details and events. And John O'Malley has also authored many books, like Vatican II, Did Anything Happen? And this is an anthology of essays by him and other scholars who experienced or lived in the years of Vatican II and beyond. Learn 25 had requested that John O'Malley record a series of lectures on the history of the popes, and he used the lecture notes to write a companion book for this, and he also recorded a series of lectures on the history of all the ecumenical councils. We also have an excellent video by him on the Council of Trent, and we're planning also a video on Vatican II early in 2022. And let us also review the books by participants before and after Vatican II that helped inspire the decrees of Vatican II, or were written soon after Vatican II by the participating theologians and bishops. Yves Congar on True and False Reform is the book that inspired Pope John the 23rd to open the windows of the Catholic Church and call the Vatican II Council into session. And he appointed the silenced Yves Congar, and he was silenced by the previous popes for his outspoken views. He appointed him to the Key Commission with Curia officials that prepared the preliminary drafts for the topics to be discussed by the bishops in the council. And his other book, The Meaning of Tradition, also contributed to the Vatican II decrees on ecumenicism. And also in Sources of Renewal, the future Pope John Paul II provides his interpretation of Vatican II. And we found this very useful in our discussion on the Vatican II decree on religious freedom. And we found this much easier to read than most of his other books. And Courtney Murray was the lead theologian for the decree on religious freedom. His book holds up the American example as a model that the Catholic Church adopted in Vatican II. Although we must admit, if you have a good civics education in American history, much of what he says is repetitive. And we're planning a video in the very near future on Yves Congar and his book True and False Reform and Vatican II, Pope John Paul XXIII calls the Council. And also in 2021, we cut this video on Yves Congar's book, The Meaning of Tradition, that influenced the decrees of Vatican II. And we also cut a video on the Vatican II Decree on Religious Freedom, and the topics in that video includes why religious freedom was such a controversial concept and decree, and how the World War II experiences profoundly influenced the Vatican II decrees, especially the decree on religious freedom, and how Pope John XXIII's encyclical Pacem in Terris prepared the way for this decree, and how the attitude towards religious freedom varied by region and by the history of these regions, and how many Catholics like the Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre just could not stomach Vatican II and its decrees, particularly the decree on religious freedom, and how this led to his schism, a schism that lasts up to the current day. Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, penned these excellent theological highlights of Vatican II, and his Ratzinger report was an interview he made with a journalist in 1985. Cardinal Ratzinger discusses his disappointment on how little effect that Vatican II has had on the faith of ordinary Catholics, and the need for catechesis on the decrees of Vatican II, which led to the issuance of the Catholic Catechism. And we also have the books by Hans Küng and Karl Rahner on Vatican II. They were also influential theologians during the proceedings of Vatican II, and these are their insider histories and observations. We also have a video on the Catholic and Lutheran catechisms and their history, and the history of how Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Ratzinger were deeply invested in the project to issue the Catholic Catechism. And we also want to mention in the list of books we have for the Catholic Catechism, Cardinal Ratzinger has a book on the Gospel Catechesis and Catechism on the Catechism, and there's a compendium of the works. Here, this is the companion to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This compendium, it's like 1,000 pages. You can pick it up used for like $10. And this includes the scriptures referenced in the Catechism by paragraph number, and also many of the documents referenced by these paragraph numbers, some of which are really hard to find. And we also have so many questions about whether Catholics can safely read Hans Küng that we cut a video on this topic. The books of Hans Küng is not on the list of books forbidden to Catholics because the Vatican II popes abolished the list of forbidden books. And we want to emphasize that Hans Küng was not excommunicated, he was not defrocked, and Pope Benedict even visited him to discuss their days at the university and at Vatican II, where both were leading theologians. In short, Hans Küng was guilty of hubris rather than heresy, and his life and works provide many interesting moral lessons for us today, so we may not be guilty of hubris, of being right in the wrong way, or thinking that we are a fountain of truth. And in our Hans Küng thumbnail, we included a picture of a red Alfa Romeo sports car, similar to the red sports car that Hans Küng zoomed through Rome during the sessions of the council. He was able to purchase this sports car from the many popular Catholic books he published, and many of his critics pointed to this red sports car as an example of his arrogance and hubris. Now, John O'Malley does discuss the decrees of Vatican II quite thoroughly, but in the sequence in which they were debated. It's also to read the histories of the decrees themselves. After all, the teachings are more important than the history of Vatican II. We have a concise guide to the documents of Vatican II, and this is an excellent concise guide on the history of each of the 5 church constitutions and major decrees. And my only complaint is maybe they could have been a little bit less concise. And we also have the Church in the Making, and that discusses the Lumen Gentium, the dogmatic constitution of the Church, Christus Dominus, decree on the pastoral office of bishops in the Church, and Orientalium Ecclesiarum, which is a decree on the Catholic Eastern churches. And also we picked up some summaries many years ago in a bookstore before the age of the internet, actually. And because of the internet, you no longer need to purchase books including the Vatican II decrees, since you can simply access them on the website. And the documents of Vatican II includes comments by Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox scholars at about the time of Vatican II, and the 16 documents of Vatican II includes the commentaries by the Church Fathers, both very valuable. And we have the Keys to the Council, and this is another history of the main decrees of Vatican II by several noted scholars. And we have Vatican II, the Crisis and Promise, and it's both a history of the Council and a reflection on the controversies and criticisms of Vatican II. And Yves Congar has My Journal of the Council, and it's exactly that, his daily diary of his thoughts and emotions on the proceedings of the Council. I will see if I can mine it for interesting stories. And our friend Yves Congar and Hans Küng collected influential speeches made during the sessions of Vatican II by the attending theologians and bishops. And we have some subsequent scholarship on Vatican II, and we found these 2 collections of interesting essays by scholars on Vatican II. And the editors of such collections always want our friend John O'Malley to be the first scholar to contribute his essay. And we have another collection of essays by scholars on the transition between Trent and Vatican II. And again, our friend John O'Malley is asked to contribute his leading essay. And we have another memoir written by Hans Küng late in his life, which concentrates on the Vatican II years. And fortunately, he really doesn't prominently discuss the proceedings leading to his revocation of permission to teach Catholic theology. Also, Avery Dulles earned his doctorate just prior to the calling of Vatican II, so he was not a participating theologian, and we do not know if he observed any of the sessions. He was a leading Catholic scholar and writer, and his books, and in particular the Models of the Church, were treasured for their accurate teachings on the theology of Vatican II. And we have a legacy of Pope John Paul II, and that's a collection and commentary on the encyclical letters issued by Pope John Paul II, who was a leading theologian of Vatican II. And our friend John O'Malley has another book on Catholic history, and that's mostly the history from Trent and Vatican II and how it affects the current church and today's Catholics. And we have even more books from John O'Malley on various topics, and many of his later books tend to dispel many myths and misunderstandings Catholics have about the history of the councils of Vatican II, Trent, and Vatican I. And in John O'Malley's History of Vatican I, he covers how the council was scheduled to address many issues, but it was cut short by the Franco-Prussian War after it only issued the decree on papal infallibility. And since World War II changed the agenda of the entire world, Pope John XXIII decreed that Vatican II would not be a continuation of Vatican I, but instead would be a new restatement of the Catholic faith to the modern world. And John O'Malley is also a Jesuit priest who's a retired college professor. He's written 2 basic histories on the Jesuit order. We've recorded one video on these histories, and we plan to record the other video on the first Jesuits later in 2022. We have some other planned series and book reviews for modern Catholic history. We're going to have a series on social justice, starting with Pope Leo XIII's encyclical, Rerum Novarum. And we're going to be talking about theology of the body and marriage and relationships, according to the writings of Pope John Paul II and other commentaries. And we'll also have the history and decrees of Vatican II and their prehistory, and Catholic and papal history prior to the Council of Trent.